zosuka zangena kwamanye amazwe lapho kungazikhona baba nomama silandela inkululeko sobashiya bazale ekhaya sasuka sangena kwamanye amazwe lapho kungazikhona baba nomama silandela inkululeko sithi salan ekhaya sesingena kwamanye amazwe lapho kungazikhona baba nomama silandela inkululeko sithi salan sesingena kwamanye amazwe lapho kungazikhona baba nomama silandela inkululeko sobashiya bafowethu sasuka sangena kwamanye amazwe lapho kungazikhona baba nomama silandela inkululeko sobashiya bafowethu sasuka sangena kwamanye amazwe lapho kungazikhona baba nomama silandela inkululeko.
Thank you. This is a very big family. If you know your mates, you'll see. It's very big. Elias, the stage is yours. The stage is yours.
Number 43, Chiloni Park, a modest house in a quiet suburb of Manzini, Swaziland, was for many years a vital safe house and base of operations for the ANC. The house came to be known as Gwamagogo, place of the grandmother, after Rebecca Makhomo Masilela, the author's mother, who provided sustenance and support to a substantial part of the ANC cadres who operated from Swaziland during the liberation struggle. The book tells the stories of the ANC and the PAC cadres who passed through number 43, revealing their hopes and fears, the softer human side of the struggle, and highlighting the high price that was paid for the liberation. The portraits of individuals from a jigsaw puzzle, at the center of which lies the house. There is also fascinating background on high-profile operations such as the Church Street bombing and the activities of Eugene de Kock, Craig Williamson, and Dirk Coetzee, as well as the defection of Glory September, turned by the security police in 1986, which unleashed a reign of terror for those operating from Swaziland. Elias Masilela was born in Mfulo North in Soweto, the youngest son of Solomon Butongo and Rebecca Makhomo Masilela, and was raised in Swaziland. He was educated at Salesian School in Manzini, the University of Swaziland, and Addis Ababa University, where he trained as an economist. He has held senior positions with the Central Bank of Swaziland and the South African National Treasury. He is currently head of stakeholder strategy at Sanlam. He tells the story of number 43 from the perspective of a young boy who found himself in the middle of events, most of which he could not comprehend.
Goeienaand. Bonne night. I'm told that I have to defend myself. I'm told that I have to live up to what has just been said before me. I don't know how to do it. The best way I can do it is relating stories. Somebody said to me earlier on today, Elias sitshela ukuthi incwadi yakho ikhuluma ngeinganekwane. Translate to your neighbor. Somebody said to me earlier on, my book is based on fairy tales. I agreed. I said, that's true. That's correct. That depends on your perspective. That depends on how you interpret the content of the book. The way JP interpreted the contents will be different from anybody else's. So, I will not try and argue whether JP was correct or wrong. And because I never disagree with friends, I'll allow him to have the night. It was one cold winter morning, sometime in May of 1983. I was bidding farewell to somebody who had visited number 43 for the first time. I didn't know that I was going to be seeing this person for the last time. We learned 2-3 days later, 20th May 1983, that he had perished at the scene of the Pretoria Church Street bomb blast. This was none other than Ezekiel Mloywa Bakai Maseko. I only get to know who this character actually is in 1999. Where, after joining the National Treasury, I stumbled into another Maseko, who coincidentally is also from Mamelodi. Jokingly, I say to this Maseko, if you're a Maseko from Mamelodi, then you must be a cousin. She said, no way, you're talking nonsense. Later on, I get invited to the unveiling of a tombstone by the same Maseko who refused to believe that she's a cousin. I discover when I get to the unveiling of the tombstone that the person who I'm unveiling a tombstone for is the person I last saw in May of 1983. This person happens to be the father of this Maseko. And this Maseko is Phumzile Maseko. This relationship grew over time, and it continues to grow. And the reason for this is multifaceted. But the one angle or the one leg of it, I think, is important to tell today. The other person I was with when I bid farewell to Ezekiel was a brother-in-law. This brother-in-law, in January of 1984, he perished under a hail of bullets in Mamelodi East. When he left number 43, he said, I am going to Botswana, I will come back. And he never came back. When the funeral was held, of our own brother-in-law, none of the family members could attend. Only a 5-month-old baby could attend the funeral, because the South African security forces couldn't draw a link between Nkosinathi Maseko and this 5-month-old baby, who happens to be my niece. This 5-month-old baby had to be jumped across the border. Under a pseudonym of Nomsa Yengwayo. We had to generate a passport for her so that she could go and represent the family in Mamelodi. I never took note of what this name actually means until I started writing the book. Asked myself, what is so relevant with this name? Nomsa Yengwayo. What it means in English is food, kindness. That is so significant to the Masilela family. That is so significant to number 43. On the 22nd of May 1987, those of us who have the book, you will see one of the pictures in the centerfold showing a passage. That passage housed a telephone. And anybody who has been to number 43 knows that telephone. It's not fancy, but it was a crucial part of that house. May 22, 1987, the phone rang at around 10 p.m. One of the many comrades ran to the phone. He thought it was a pleasant call. He could go for a drink with friends. The person on the other side was uncharacteristically frantic. And that happens to be my brother Todd. Those who know Todd will know how cool a person he is. But on that day, he was hysterical. Theophilus Viva Giorgio had been assassinated by the death squads, almost at the doorstep of Todd's house. Amongst the many revelations in the TRC report, this is one of the major occurrences. Only 5 months earlier, Viva Giorgio was married in the same house which he walked out of before he was assassinated. Now, all these are happening not by design of our doing, but are happening by design of other doings. The death of Nkosinathi was a result of what a very close friend, trusted friend, a confidant to Nkosinathi did. The death of Viva Giorgio was a function of somebody we trusted so much with all security information in Swaziland, and that person used it in the manner in which it was used. A year earlier, a person which will be popularly known to you as Mr. X, who lived operated and sent instructions from number 43 was at number 43, and we engaged on extensive political and economic debates till around 3:30 in the morning. At 10 o'clock the following day, he was arrested by the Swazi police. That same evening, he disappeared from the police cells in Swaziland. Nobody knows how that happened and why it happened. A few months later, that Mr. X emerges as an Askari. He comes back to Swaziland. He wreaks havoc. People die, people are maimed, people disappear, houses are bombed, cars are shot at. And this was none other than Glory September, whom I had adopted as a brother, because my eldest brother Todd was no longer at home. My brother Lucky had decided to go deeper into exile, and Glory September became my brother during that period. That was a trying time. Number 43 was under military guard, military surveillance, 24 hours a day. That is not a pleasant environment to live within. However, September continued his operations until he was eliminated in 1994, just before the first democratic elections. A question that we've always had as the Masilela family is, in all the operations that he did as an Askari, why did he never target number 43? Why did he never target any of the family members? Because they were so exposed. We developed all sorts of theories, all sorts of hypotheses, all of which were not fit to be accepted. They were all rejected. In 2005, I had the great fortune of interviewing a police officer who is currently in the South African police force, who has operated with Eugene de Kock in Swaziland, the only remaining police officers who has access to Eugene de Kock today. And the key objective of that interview was to ask him why number 43 was never targeted. Because the person I could ask was no longer. His response was a chilling one. He simply said to me, Elias, very simple answer. The philosophy of the police force of that time was that we would never target a house that houses people that work for us. That was the end of the interview. I didn't want to know who those people were. It wasn't going to help. Those are the stories of number 43. Plain, direct, it's up to you to interpret. I don't try to find answers to all these things. I don't try to find who sold out or who was an honest comrade. I don't think I'm capable of doing that. Instead, what I do, I throw out the questions out there into the open. Like pieces of a jigsaw that force the reader to pull them together and paint this picture. How you conclude is entirely up to you. How JP has concluded is entirely up to him. This is why I will not disagree with his observations. As a result of this, I took a conscious decision of not writing in a thematic fashion, where I tell a story from the beginning and conclude at the end. Simply because there is no way I could conclude in a fair manner. I didn't want to be the arbiter of history. I would rather leave that to the reader. I would rather leave that to the activities and the experiences of people who've had relationships with number 43. Who are these people? They are numerous. They range from the current president of South Africa to the lowest member of the ANC that you've never heard of, you shall never ever hear of. However, this book is about the ordinary people. It does not talk about the senior officials of the ANC. It does not talk about prominent people. The logic is simple. The logic is that we want to tell the story of the people who will never be heard of, who will never be known. That is the nature of number 43 Trelawney Park. Some people have asked me, Elias, have you ever had any fears? And my answer has always been, then no, now yes. But these fears are irrelevant, given that there's no risk. However, when I started writing, it was amazing to realize the level and the amount of fear that is still sitting in the hearts of people. I interviewed close to 60 people in a period of 1 year, the bulk of which did not want to be identified. Predominantly Swazis. That is a real concern. I don't talk about this concern in the book, but I've thought about it. It basically means people are not yet convinced that change is here. People are not yet convinced that their governments are worth trusting. And that is something that we have to think about outside this book. People have also asked me, but apart from these stories, what is this book about? I said, okay, if you want me to be scientific about the book and not tell fairy tales, if you want me to be objective here, the book does something very simple. What it does is draw a parallel between number 43 Trelawney Park with Lily's Leaf Farm in Rivonia. Anybody who doesn't know Lily's Leaf? Okay. It argues that the two properties contributed significantly to the liberation of South Africa. But in the same breath, it concludes that number 43 contributed much, much more than Lily's Leaf. I'm sure the hard toiling and sweating from the first day I put pen to paper up to product, it took 3 years. But we all know that book writing doesn't start at the point you put pen on paper. The thinking stage, which to me is the most important stage of anything that you do, started in 1984. You can count, 23 years. Since then, shortly after the Nkomati Accord, I've been toying with the idea up until 1994 at the unveiling of the tombstone of Nkosinathi Maseko. That's where I made the decision. I am going to put this onto paper. Whether I've achieved in communicating what was happening in our past, I will not know until I get comments from people. The last question that I would like to answer is, what did I learn from this exercise? There are two things I learned. Firstly, is that trust is bliss. If you trust somebody, you're better off than somebody who doesn't trust. In those circumstances, we didn't know the people we lived with. We didn't understand the people we lived with. The only thing you knew about somebody was the name he gives to you. He will be Mandla in Swaziland. He will be Pedro in Mozambique. He will be Constantine in Zimbabwe. And something else in the GDR. But you would never dare ask why. Unfortunately, the relationship was grossly asymmetric. They knew everything about us. When they came to number 43 and left, we never knew where they were going to. We never knew when they were going to come back. Some came back a year later, some came back 10 years later, others never came back. That's how vulnerable we were. The only tool we had was trust. I don't know whether it worked or it didn't. Those of us who did econometrics at school, Matthew, may argue that it may be a spurious regression, but there is a relationship between trust and the result that we saw. The other thing that I learned was that we don't know ourselves as a family. When I set each one of the members of the family to tell me about themselves, they told me 10% or less of what people outside told me. And to me, this was a very important and significant revelation. The confidence that people had in the Masilela family, the appreciation they had in their relationship with number 43. I didn't come up with this title. I didn't come up with a hypothesis that this house can be equated to Lily's Leaf Farm. This was a comrade who said, Elias, you know, I actually don't understand why Lily's Leaf Farm can be declared a national monument and this house is not. This house qualifies 10 times more than Lily's Leaf Farm. As soon as he said that, the theme was formed, the title was finalized. Typically, a lot of books, you finalize the title at the end. This, the title was finalized before pen got to paper. Those are the lessons that I have of my experience. Now, I'm under strict instruction here to say something about people, to thank people. Otherwise, I was told I would be strangled. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors first and foremost, for having used the instrument that we have used as a family for the past 40 years, the instrument of trust. These sponsors put trust onto this project. They put confidence onto this project. They put their time onto this project. Not only that, they put money behind it. And this is very significant because none of them had seen the script. They just believed in the proposal. And that's what we had to live with over the past 40 years. Believing in trust. Now, the sponsors are numerous. Some of them have requested that they shouldn't be announced. So the list that I'm announcing here is not the complete list. There's a longer list below this. The Apartheid Museum, which I would like to call the Apartheid Museum, contributed by hosting this function tonight and has made a conscious decision, even before seeing the book, to partner with this project going forward. BHB Billiton, Dombolo Masilela. There are a few Masilelas who have deep pockets. I'm definitely not one of them. Masingita Investments, Max Lamini, New Shelf 851, Paul Kluver, Sitole Incorporated, Fagutse, and lastly, but not least, somebody who comes out of a family that supported, associated, and lived with the Masilelas through thick and thin. At the time when many South African families in Swaziland literally deserted the Masilela family, because they were too risky, caused by a shisa in those days. They are too hot. This family saw us through those periods. And that is Phuthuma Nhleko. Here with us is, I refer to them in the book as Utom and Udora Nhleko. There are many more other families, but this one stands out. When the first elections, in South African elections in South Africa were held, Swaziland had a booth for South Africans residing in Swaziland. A handful of families, less than 5, went to vote. The rest of them crossed the border into South Africa because they didn't want the Swazi police to recognize them as being associated with the changes. Leading the pack of 5 families was the Masilela and the Nhleko families. And that is how significant the relationship is with the families. Other people I would like to thank are the organizers who put this function together. I can indicate at this stage that Masingita and Sitole Incorporated have sponsored and funded the surprise that you're going to see outside there. I don't know what there is outside there, but I'm told there's a surprise. On behalf of the Masilela family, we would like to thank the people of Swaziland, in particular, the residents of number 43, who embraced the Masilela family as far back as 1965 when they arrived in the country and settled in Trelawney Park. They went through difficult times. They went cool, they went warm, but They had no option. They had to be with us throughout that process. Lastly, I would like to thank a group which is the most sensitive, and that is my family. I'll start off with my siblings. They gave me the latitude and the license to interpret and reinterpret their lives. Some liked what I said, others didn't. Those of us who have the book will understand why I would want to apologize to one of my siblings. There's a chapter in the book which is entitled The Prodigal Daughter. She doesn't like the title, but she believes everything I've said. The next set of people I would like to thank and recognize is my wife and kids. Throughout the period when I was writing this book, they were living with an absentee father and husband, but at no point did they complain. At least not to me. Lastly, and most importantly, I would like to thank those people who actually made this history. I've argued with a lot of academics. I've argued with a lot of English speakers. JP, you're better than me. English is a fourth language to me. I've argued that I'm not an author. I've argued that I'm just a reporter of events. I've collated thoughts of people. I've collated experiences of people. And I would like to recognize those people, both in South Africa and Swaziland, who actually made the history, together with uMagogo and uButhongo. In their recognition, I would request them to stand, whoever is in the house, anybody who operated from Swaziland. I will call them by name, Abang. No, I won't. But there are a few of us around here, and I would like to recognize you. Without those experiences, without the relationship we shared, I would not have written this book. And to all of us who are here, I will thank you for having taken time away from watching the most historic football game in South Africa to be part of this event. And also being confident to buy the book before you hear the stories in here. However, for us economists, we say there's no free lunch. I will leave you with a task. As you read this book, don't read it for enjoyment. This is not a novel. Please read it with the aim or the objective of putting the pieces together of this complex jigsaw and help us resolve a lot of the questions that we have lingering in our minds. And help me write my second book. Thank you very much.